Hello everyone and welcome to our sixth and last class of international strategy. And today the topic of the class will be strategy evaluation. So far we have really seen how to build and design strategy, but for the last part it's important to be aware that it's also very important to measure and assess a strategy. And actually, strategy is not a one-time process. It's not that you define your strategy for the next 5 years and that then you just deploy it. No, you need to measure it. And of course, you need to adapt it continuously. So it doesn't mean that you change strategy every 3 months. Of course not. But you need sometimes to tweak it a bit and to make adjustments. So that's really key. And so today we have two main chapters. The first one is really to assess the current performance. So how do you evaluate the result of the strategy you have already decided and put in place? And you'll see that it's possible to do that through performance measure, through performance comparisons, and through gap analysis. And then at the same time as you evaluate your future option, it's always important to evaluate future static options. And there we'll see a very famous framework, which is called the SAFE framework. S for suitability of strategic options, A for acceptability of strategic option, and F for feasibility of strategic options. So that will be later on today. Why is it, of course, important to assess strategy also? It's because you need to make the management accountable. So shareholders, board of directors, they need to assess and measure performance to see the results, to be able to adjust and steer the management if needed. And so here you just have a few headlines, and sometimes when things go wrong, you need to change the management, and the way to see that things go wrong is to have a broad perspective on performance. So let's start on the current performance, and by focusing on performance measure. And the very basic manner to measure performance is through direct economic performance. Think about it, that's just metrics, that's just figures. You look at the market share, you look at the profit margin, you look at your share price. So that's here on the left. It's the most basic way to measure performance. A bit more evolved would be the overall organizational effectiveness types of indicator, and there you will actually start to combine indicators into more advanced performance measurement tool. So it would be dashboard, it would be balance scorecard, or it would be other framework. So that's on this that we will focus today, because that's what most of the company use. Obviously, you need a certain sophistication to measure your performance accurately. So again, just to remind you, please read all the slides. I've really designed them to include all the explanation in written, and so I will today really focus on the extra explanation without reading too many of the slides. That's probably something you'll be able to do yourself. So a key notion, obviously, is the notion of key performance indicator, and you know that, I'm pretty sure. So KPI, that's a buzzword you will hear throughout your career. But having good KPIs, it's really key to evaluate performance. And you see the definition here. You see a bit what it is, what it's not. So I will not read through this, but keep in mind that it all starts with the right KPI. And you have different types of KPIs. You have lagging indicators and leading indicators. Lagging, it's already good. That's a bit what I explained in the beginning. It's really looking at a result. That's really the outcome of your strategy, of the actions you have taken. So if I take a very basic one, a lagging indicator on this, if you want to look at your top line, it would be total turnover. Okay, it's good, you see it, and you have targets, you have budget, so you can assess if you have met your budget. But the leading indicator of total turnover would be, for example, if you're a sales company, it would be the sales call made per day by your salespeople. And actually, this one is actually much more interesting, because you can boost lagging KPI by improving leading KPI. If you tell them to make more calls, then you have probably a chance that your turnover will increase. So working on leading indicators, you have much more grip on it, and you can influence them much more directly and much more easily. So they are sometimes more difficult. So those are more difficult to measure, but can influence them. Those one, they are straightforward. They comes from your balance sheet, your P&L, your analytical accounting, but you cannot really influence them. Right? It's more the result that could be more the cause. And obviously, all the companies, they will combine KPIs into dashboards. So I've put a few examples and a few explanations, but keep in mind, if you're CEO of a big company, you don't want to have tons of data figure. You want to have every Monday morning on your desk a nice dashboard that will summarize the key leading and lagging indicator of your business. And that's something you want to track. Yeah, weekly would be a minimum, but almost daily. And you will focus on those and take the action from the top if needed. And that's obviously something that you can cascade through the organization. So please look at the example. So that's an example from some of my clients in the past that I've made some anonymous, but you can see what a dashboard look like. So that's one. That's another one with some explanation. Some others they will decide to go for value tree model, which I like, but I have to say it's less the case in practice. So it's nice in theory and it's nice to assess the impact of some of your action, but that's probably not the kind of dashboard you will use on a daily basis. But it's really breaking down the components of your your net income, your gross margin, your value added into the main component until you reach the level of KPI, until you reach what you can really influence here. So you start from the financial perspective to arrive at the operational perspective. And it's by working on the operational perspective that you can progressively improve your financial perspective. So that's other examples. That's to tell you that you can have dashboard, you can have, and you must have indicators at each level of the organization. So you have the KPI that the boss will look on Monday, but you will also have the KPIs that the operational team will look on a daily basis on the field. And it's really important to have this cascade and to be able to measure performance at each level of the organization and to make the links from the shop floor to the executive meeting room. Okay. And so you have a few best practices that you need to keep in mind regarding KPIs. One, probably if I have to put two in perspective and insist on two based on my experience, the first one would be focus on a small number of KPIs. So you don't need tens or hundreds of figures. That's not possible to track. So really think about the one that really matter and focus on them. And then very important, it's one single source of truth. And you'll see when you start working, it's very easy to define the KPIs, but then you will realize that to have the correct data, to be sure that everybody's talking about the same thing, that everybody is using the same source, that the figures are reliable, that's probably one of the biggest issue of any company today, because they've become so complex, the system and IT system are so complex that it's often difficult to have one single source of truth, but it's really a basis, right? And so you have advantages. I've listed some of them, but you have always also risk of using KPIs. Everybody's is written here. So if we move to a slightly more advanced concept, it would be to structure and articulate KPIs into a balanced scorecard. So the balanced scorecard, I'm pretty sure you've seen that in other classes, so I will not spend too much time on it. I think you have enough information in the slide again, but it's again, it's one of those. It's among the foundation of modern strategy and modern business. It was introduced in 1992 by Kaplan and Norton in the US, and it's really a way to really measure what matters, to really focus on the drivers of future performance. And it's structured around four quadrants. You have indicators on your customer and your market. You have one on your process and organization, one on your financials, and one on your employees. So you see that the balance scorecard looks inside the company, but also outside the company. And with those four dimensions, Kaplan and Norton believe that you can probably measure the entire measure that matters for a business. So it has a value, obviously, to to drive your strategy, to evaluate it, but also to communicate it to your people and externally as well. So I've said you have probably seen it. So and based on my experience from previous years, I know that most of you have seen it. If you want more information, you have a nice video here, and you have also the original article that was published in Harvard Business Review in 1992. So please click on the links if you want to have more. And the following slides will give you also more information about the type of indicators, some example of indicators, and a link with the strategic goals that are associated with them. And finally, a last notion would be the triple bottom line. It's one among many different frameworks, but what I want to convey here is that you need to go further than just profit, right? That's one of the P, profit, but I mean there by the financial performance of your business. Today, more and more, and I know it's very important for you, and rightly so, and especially in the current circumstances, we need to have a much more holistic and complete view of the business. And so you need also to have indicators about your people, but also the other people, the one working for you, the family of your people, and so on, and the planet. And it's the topic of sustainability. And it's only by finding the right balance and the optimum between those three dimensions that you can have a sustainable business. So you see the intersection. So if you have only the people and the planet but no profit, okay, it's bearable, but the business will not survive. That's not the goal, right? If it's only people and profit, it's probably equitable, but you forget one dimension. If it's just the planet, the profit is viable. You don't damage your planet, but you forget the people. So that's really the intersection that would make a business sustainable. So it's really important. There is more and more scrutiny for all those dimensions. You don't need to take it as greenwashing, just doing it to have a good image. No, you need to really fully encompass it in your processes, in your way of operating, and that's obviously more and more important. So quickly, that was really performance measure. Once you have the measure, you need also to compare them, right? And so, because if you don't have anything to compare to, then you don't know if you do it well or not. And so, very basically, you have three ways to do that. You can compare to your own targets. So in the beginning of the year, you said I need to sell that much, and you forgot you compare your figure to that, and that's the basic level. But that's of course needed to put targets and to compare your actual results to your expected targets. Then you can also do an analysis over time. How is my turnover increasing and improving over time? And then the third one, more advanced, would be to benchmark yourself, not to yourself, but to other comparable organizations within your industry or outside your industry. And this can be combined also over time. And that's obviously what is powerful. And so when I was working in consulting, one of the first questions of any client was, what's the benchmark? Am I doing well or not compared to my competitors? And that's also actually a value of the strategy consultant, is to be able to tell to a client if they are good or not in one specific field. But it's obviously something that is important, not always easy to obtain, but very key. And so here you have a few examples of targets, and that's the group Volkswagen that has defined some targets for itself. A few examples of benchmarks as well, but it's basic, and I know you have probably seen that in other classes. Yeah, and so I said it's basic, but sometimes, of course, it's more complex than what it looks. So sometimes you can have contradictory elements between the long term and the short term. You can boost sales in the short term, but it will not. But at the expense of your margin in the short run, because you need to invest. Of course, there may be problem of manipulation of data. You can also, influence and manage the perception and the expectation of your stakeholders. And then what matters in terms of performance can change over time. And one good example is probably the triple P that I've highlighted just before. And then last point is, of course, you will measure your actual performance with where you want it to be, and there is potentially a gap that you need to close over time.